Life Sentence by S. Hofeller. Let the punishment fit the crime is a paradigm we humans have been clinging to for a long-ass time. It frustrates us because it is, in worldly reality, utterly, awkwardly unenforceable. Those that talk of a restorative justice are maybe only a little closer. But even if the emphasis is on compensation for the victim and rehabilitation for the perpetrator, we're still left with a troublesome subject for measure. Pain is not something that can be sized up with meters. Distance at first glance seems so very simple, yet when we go either too big or too small, we suddenly lack the laws of science and math for accuracy. As time and gravity remain well beyond our ken, we desperately reach for an explanation of what life actually is. But life in prison? Well, that's a phrase that gets tossed around all the time. I say this because right alongside the ugly, why did you stay? It's a question I get a lot. Why didn't you just let the state hang him? Why? Well, punishment and justice are uneasy allies, at best. His trials did not thrill me, nor did they seem fair to me, and no fraction of it absolved him from a single one of his sins against me. It was partisan, dishonest, pointless, reckless, and random, with an offensive glaze of faulty reason, just as his trials of me. His disorganized abuse degenerated my, self. Well, this witch hunt degenerated his. Not that he didn't take the opportunity to learn. Jail, for example, is an incredibly rich educational experience, to be sure. When he first arrived in the pre-trial felon wing of South Central Regional Jail in Charleston, West Virginia, it had only been a few hours since his first mugshot appearance on the evening news, and he was faced with a rather intimidating expectation. These men were hating him as if he'd done that newsworthy shit. Don't worry. By the end of his stay, it was well known that he was nothing more than a benevolent beater, a firm but loving husband, not that lunatic character the press had created. But during that first week, as other inmates threatened him, against the vocal objection of my own attorney, I allowed his eager lawyer to release my statement of his innocence to the press. He was able to take control of the pod when my television appearances gave him just the dazzling little boost that he needed. His own dazzle accomplished the rest. And oh, he was a righteous leader, a skilled negotiator, defender of the weak, guardian of order. He refrained from victimizing anybody he was in with. Funny that he treated his fellow inmates with more respect than he did me, whatever his reasons. But all that aside, could anyone really believe that I would enjoy seeing my husband lynched by a bunch of ignorant, xenophobic morons? As if that would be, in any way, the same as what he did to me? And how do you dare to even presume what I think fitting would be? But that's right, it wasn't wife versus husband, it was state versus perp. It didn't gain the state any dignity, though, and it yielded nothing but grief for me and his children, and him, and the whole fucking family. Although his imprisonment had a character of abuse, his experience did not increase his empathy for me, not one single bit. If anything, I lost the moral high ground in the suggestion that I had something to gain from his suffering and or humiliation. Thank you, Jackson County, with a nod to the Duluth model PhDs, for destroying my attempts to communicate with this man and in so doing reconcile with this man and convince him to set us all free from his hierarchy. I'm not suggesting that it would have worked, but regardless, you hindered me. You did not help with your how-tos and your FAQs and your hurting the semi-sentient woman is a greater crime than hurting someone with a brain bullshit. Thank you for lying that you could peg me or peg a crime against me and in so doing, setting me up to expose you. Come on, you'd already punished me for that all those years ago. And now, what more do you intend to take from me? All that's left to take from me is my life, my real life, not the one you can put in detention. And, well, I keep that life on me every second of every day, so it's never without some protection. I wish I could report honestly that there was never any hint of lover's revenge to anything I ever did. I would also like to say that I am a perfect pacifist and was never the least bit satisfied about anything unpleasant that he experienced. But I can't. And I was, in truth, a co-defendant. Testimony compelled from the victim. No spousal privilege for DV collaborators. In criminal court, there's a nice end run around the Fifth Amendment to civil, family, court in a play called Statement Against Interest. In my defense, though, lover's revenge is supposed to be directed by the lover. But sometimes things get out of hand. But nevertheless, the argument with him was mine. I didn't want or even ask for their soldiers. It was not their battle, nor were they loyal to me, nor were they loyal to my cause. I left him years later and on my own accord. I can assure you that it does not mean that I decided you all were right. I did not choose the wrong person to love or to father children. And to this day, seeing him suffer is not my cherished outcome. I would like to see him live and never do this again. He's not brainless, you know. And although perhaps immoral, certainly not amoral, why didn't you and don't you now try to convince him? I tried and failed, and I don't want to listen anymore. But how about you, society? I know. You don't really want men and women to get along, do you? Nevertheless, convince, I said, not order or punish. And yes, fuck you, there are ways to convince people without punishing them. And, as a matter of fact, used on wild-eyed animals like him and me. Punishment only molds loathing. But, of course, I can't speak for everyone. But speaking of myself, never mind the time I spent in jail. As wild-eyed as I am, the hundreds of hours that I was forced to spend in court were an exquisite sentence all by themselves. The whole process of being called to, preparing for, and going to court feels like rape on a good day. But I was #MeToo'd hard, publicly and repeatedly. How was it sexual harassment? Well, it climaxed in the kidnapping of my children for life on weird, wild grounds that, well, for lack of a finer point to put on it, I have sex wrong. I have sex without deodorant. I have sex without razors. I have sex while prohibited from so doing by standing court order. I have sex with so very much the wrong people when I do. I have sex without doctors, before or after. And is not, after all, giving birth the most important act of sexual joy that the man wants to steal from woman? He guards it dearly, but I stole it back. Well, almost. Well, at least a good portion. And during all of my sordid communions, I was promoting the wrong economy with the wrong political system. And at the peak of my orgasm, I cried out to the glory of the wrong God. There was no room, no corner of my life in which I was not leered at and molested by my enemies. All of them. And they shared their intel, believe me. Still not convinced that it was sexual humiliation? Do you know how many times I got to look at 45 color photographs of my injured body? Oh, so you really think that the story would have been so titillating if it weren't for the naked picture of my left tit? The same one that I would end conversations with lawyers by saying, and as long as we're still talking about it, go ahead and tell Judge TCE3 that he can fucking suck it. Shall I continue? Okay. Whilst in state custody, thanks, Dad, and your attorney, attorneys. I was finally taken to the doctor they claimed I wouldn't see. In the waiting room at Women's and Children's, I was made to sit with moms and children in full orange and gravid, hands cuffed, chaperoned by a cave woman guard, chewing her gum and acting like it was necessary. When the hapless intern said they'd normally do a pap, I stated that nope, no way in hell I was going to put my feet in stirrups with my hands in cuffs. And contrary to belief, I was not accustomed to it. And the only birth in chains would have been the one I would have suffered if I'd gotten out just a few weeks later than I did. More? Oh yeah, there's more. For 13 months, they held on to every scrap of mine and the husband's stored data. On phones, computers, cameras, CDs, and photographs, and a 2-page handwritten note. They listened to our phone calls and had our lawyers read our mail. No journals, though. I really couldn't afford at that time to speak, as it were, so freely. They made copies of it all. Oh, yeah, and a naked home birth photo of me and my son somehow made its way onto Pinterest during its time in their custody. That's only one of the hashtag cyberbullying sucks that I know about, not the extent of what I suspect. The second time I gave birth at home, I did so with a dress, so that footage could be shared with the court if necessary. Enough already? I speak of my punishment, this one, at the hands of state-run authority, to highlight the irony of the state of X versus person. The gravity of one atonement measured against another cannot be quantified. I would suffer any pain to have my children by my side. I'm not suggesting that he, their father, couldn't or wouldn't have taken them from me all by himself. What I'm saying is that in the end, he didn't take them from me, you did. How much are you, reader, a part of that you? Well, I guess it depends on how much you identify yourself with the state. Technically, they have it worked out well, so that we are, all of us, you. It has no soul, it has no life, so I can't feel sorry for the dignity of the state. I objected to the court's imposition of discipline on the grounds that it was unjust, yes. That same injustice was glaring in my lover's judgment of me as well. But even more profound than the lack of justice was the lack of jurisdiction. And if my living, breathing, feeling husband didn't have it, then how could I yield in mind or spirit to a thing? Why must I yield at all? And what about the living? As previously established, we don't even know what life is. So mankind invented God. We try to use its intelligent design as the variable placeholder for our complicated equations. But the trouble with a variable is that it is inevitably variable. An equation? It is reason as we know it. But maybe the trouble is an in-the-box assumption that there's an equal sign in there at all. Perhaps the equality already exists in all things, and the calculation necessary is something entirely different. Yet we stubbornly cling to the belief that there must be a scale for everything. And if we can't judge it, God will. But the jury of gods is still out. Worse yet, a self-declared stand-in has usurped its alleged, and probably even imaginary, place in the court of good and evil. I, myself, don't want to mark the greatness of victory for human progress by the number of months that some asshole spends in the pen. I dare say that it's no progress at all, even if the sentence is life.